From child predators to contract slavers to literal accomplices to genocide, these aren't your typical Hollywood scandals. These are monsters who use their power to destroy lives systematically. And the most terrifying part? Some of them are still celebrated today. Ready to see how deep this rabbit hole goes? Louis B. Mayer, the monster who built an empire on broken children. Let's start with the man who literally built the studio system and used it to systematically abuse children for 40 years. Louis B. Mayer wasn't just MGM's boss. He was a predator who turned the most powerful studio in Hollywood into his personal hunting ground. Born Lazar Mayer in Belarus, Mayer escaped poverty through sheer brutality. His father, Jacob, regularly beat him with fists and leather belts, teaching young Louis that power came through fear and intimidation. The family fled anti-Jewish violence, arriving in Canada when Louis was 3. They lived in squalid conditions, where his father collected scrap metal while beating his wife Sarah regularly. Louis witnessed this violence daily and vowed he'd never be powerless again. But power, for Mayer, meant something twisted. He didn't just want control. He wanted to break people, especially young performers who reminded him of his own helpless childhood. Take Judy Garland. MGM's doctors started giving her amphetamines when she was 10 years old. 10. They told her it would keep her thin and energetic. When she couldn't sleep from the uppers, they gave her barbiturates. When she was too groggy from the downers, more stimulants. Mayer personally supervised this chemical torture, creating the addiction that would eventually end her life. But the substances were just the beginning. Garland later revealed that Mayer would force her to sit on his lap while he groped her, telling her it was fatherly affection. When she tried to resist, he'd threatened to destroy her career and leave her family destitute. He called her "my little hunchback" because of her curved spine, a cruel nickname that haunted her forever. Elizabeth Taylor fought him constantly, calling him a monster to his face. Smart girl, she recognized evil when she saw it. But not every child had her strength. Here's what makes my blood boil. Mayer convinced parents this was normal. "Trust me with your children," he'd say. "I'll make them stars." What he made them was victims. His control extended beyond the studio walls. He decided who his stars could marry, where they could live, what they could say publicly. Cross him, and he'd destroy not just your career, but your entire existence. There's a rumor, and I believe it's true, that Mayer covered up a vehicular incident involving Clark Gable. The story goes that Gable was driving recklessly when he struck another vehicle, resulting in the other drivers passing. Mayer allegedly arranged for another person to take the blame to save his star. That's the level of corruption we're dealing with. When actress John Howard rejected his advances, Mayer didn't just accept it. He banned her agent from MGM property and blacklisted any of his clients. When that didn't work, he allegedly threatened to harm himself, once attempting to jump from a window while intoxicated, trying to guilt Howard into submission. Mayer ruled MGM for 40 years. 40 years of systematic abuse, covered up by the most powerful studio in Hollywood. He passed away wealthy and honored in 1957. His crimes buried beneath Academy Awards and industry praise. But Mayer was just the beginning. Wait until you hear about our next monster, who turned childhood stars into his personal playthings. Arthur Freed, the predator who hid behind family entertainment. Arthur Freed produced some of Hollywood's most beloved family films. The Wizard of Oz, Singin' in the Rain, An American in Paris, movies that defined wholesome entertainment. But behind the scenes, Freed was a predator who targeted the youngest, most vulnerable performers in Hollywood. His most documented victim was Shirley Temple, America's sweetheart. But what Freed did to her, and countless other child actors, proves that Hollywood's definition of family entertainment was a sick joke. In 1932, Freed's studio created the Baby Burlesques series. And yes, you read that right. They put young children in adult scenarios, sexualizing them for entertainment. 3-year-old Shirley Temple played a prostitute named Charmaine in War Babies. A prostitute at 3 years old. Yeah, think that's bad? In the Bright Eyes, they had over a dozen adult men carry, touch, and sing to the toddler, while she performed On the Good Ship Lollipop. in revealing outfits. The 1936 film, Poor Little Rich Girl, featured multiple scenes of grown men fondling Temple. This wasn't accidental. It was deliberate exploitation, marketed as family fun. But the real horror happened off-screen. In 1940, when Shirley Temple was 12 years old, producer Arthur Freed of Metro Goldwyn-Mayer exposed himself to her during a private meeting. Temple, being a child, laughed because she didn't understand what was happening. Freed, enraged by her innocent reaction, immediately kicked her out of his office. 12 years old. Let that sink in. What's most disgusting is that everyone knew. Studio executives, other producers, agents, they all knew Freed was a predator. And they protected him because his films made money. Here's the kicker. Being a well-known predator didn't hurt Freed's career. After his assault on Temple, he went on to produce some of Hollywood's biggest hits. The industry rewarded him with Oscars, praise, and more access to children. Temple herself didn't speak publicly about the incident until decades later, when she was finally safe from Freed's influence. But how many other children weren't so lucky? How many victims stayed silent because no one would believe them over the man who made The Wizard of Oz? Drop a comment if you think Freed should be remembered for his crimes, not his films, because our next monster proves that some evils transcend even Hollywood's capacity for cover-ups. Emil Jannings, the Oscar winner who chose evil. This story is different from the others. Emil Jannings didn't just enable evil or ignore it. He actively chose to serve it. And his choice makes every other story on this list look like amateur hour. Emil Jannings was the first person ever to win the Academy Award for Best Actor, the very first, in 1928. He beat Charlie Chaplin and John Barrymore. He was earning $200,000 per film at Paramount, about $3 million per film today. He was cultured, sophisticated, multilingual, the kind of actor who elevated everything he touched. Then came 1929 and the arrival of talking pictures. Emil's thick German accent made him unemployable in Hollywood overnight. So he went home to Germany, clutching that Oscar, thinking he'd continue his career in German films. When the Nazis rose to power in 1933, Emil had a choice. Many German artists fled: Marlene Dietrich, Fritz Lang, Billy Wilder. They saw what was coming and got out. Emil stayed. Not just stayed. He embraced the Nazi regime with enthusiasm. He became Joseph Goebbels' favorite actor. The propaganda minister loved that Emil had conquered Hollywood and come home to serve the fatherland. That Oscar became a Nazi propaganda tool. Emil starred in Nazi propaganda films designed to spread hatred. Der Herrscher in 1937, Ohm Kruger in 1941, a violently anti-British film where Emil played the title role. These weren't just regular movies made during wartime. These were hate-filled propaganda pieces designed to justify genocide. He was paid handsomely for his collaboration, given a beautiful estate, awarded the title Artist of the State. He'd carry that Oscar to Nazi party functions, showing it off while surrounded by war criminals. Here's what really makes me sick. Emil wasn't forced into this. He chose it. He could have stayed silent, made neutral films, or found other ways to survive. Instead, he actively participated in promoting the ideology that would lead to the Holocaust. When the war ended in 1945, Emil's world collapsed overnight. The Allies declared him a Nazi collaborator. He was banned from ever making films again. His assets were seized. His reputation was destroyed. He tried to claim he'd been forced to make those films, that he'd had no choice. Nobody believed him. There were too many photos of him smiling with Goebbels, giving the Nazi salute, celebrating at party events. December 1945. Emil Jannings passed away in Austria, in a small house on a lake. He was only 65. The cause was liver cancer, but really he perished from disgrace. His friends had abandoned him. His country had rejected him. His legacy was forever tainted. That Oscar he was so proud of, it couldn't buy him redemption. The first Academy Award winner became the first to prove that talent without conscience means nothing. Some people lose their fortunes to bad luck or addiction. Emil Jannings lost his to a choice, the choice to side with evil. And unlike money, that's something you can never earn back. But even Nazi collaboration seems almost quaint compared to what our next monster did to children. Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense and terror. Alfred Hitchcock created some of cinema's greatest masterpieces. He's also one of the most disturbing examples of how Hollywood protected predators by calling their crimes genius. Born in London to strict Catholic parents, Hitchcock's childhood was dominated by fear and rigid discipline. His father once had him locked in a jail cell by a police officer as punishment for minor misbehavior, an experience that left him with a lifelong terror of authority and confinement. He attended a Jesuit school where corporal punishment was routine. Young Alfred was overweight and socially awkward, earning the cruel nickname Fred. His mother Emma was controlling and emotionally distant, often ignoring him for days as punishment. These early experiences with powerlessness created an adult who needed to control and psychologically torment others, especially the actresses who worked for him. Tippi Hedren learned this the hard way. When Hitchcock cast her in The Birds, she thought she was getting the opportunity of a lifetime. Instead, she got a masterclass in psychological abuse from one of Hollywood's most celebrated directors. Hitchcock became obsessed with Hedren during production. He'd follow her around the set, demand to know her whereabouts constantly, and isolate her from other cast members. When she tried to maintain professional boundaries, he escalated. He deliberately put her dressing room next to his office so he could monitor her comings and goings. He'd show up at her home uninvited. He'd call her at all hours. This wasn't direction. This was stalking. When Hedren finally tried to end her contract with him, Hitchcock revealed his true nature. He blacklisted her completely. This wasn't just about losing one job. Hitchcock's influence was so vast that he could destroy careers with a phone call. For years, Hedren couldn't find work anywhere in Hollywood. The man who'd discovered her made sure she'd never work again. Why? Because she wouldn't submit to his advances. But here's what really makes me angry. Hollywood knew. They all knew Hitchcock was a predator who terrorized his leading ladies. And they called it method directing or perfectionism. They gave him awards while he destroyed women's lives. Even after he passed away, Hitchcock's cultural status made him untouchable. Critics wrote books about his complex relationship with women, instead of calling him what he was, an abuser who used his power to terrorize actresses. Think about that the next time someone praises Hitchcock's psychological depth. That depth came from a man who enjoyed inflicting psychological pain on vulnerable women. And speaking of psychological pain, our next monster perfected the art of destroying human beings from the inside out. Eddie Mannix, the fixer who fixed everything except his own soul. If you think Harvey Weinstein was bad, meet Eddie Mannix, the man who made covering up heinous crimes look like a regular Tuesday at the office. For 40 years, this MGM executive didn't just enable evil, he was evil, systematically destroying evidence and silencing victims to protect the studio's image. Eddie Mannix wasn't just a studio executive. He was MGM's personal cleanup crew for everything from assault to possible homicide. His job title might have been general manager, but his real job was making inconvenient truths disappear forever. In the 1930s, an MGM executive was accused of assault by Patricia Douglas. Did Mannix investigate? Fire the executive? Provide support for the victim? Of course not. He buried the case so deep that Douglas couldn't even get a hearing from the district attorney. The victim was silenced, while her attacker continued his career. Then there's the George Reeves case, TV's original Superman, who was found deceased in 1959 under mysterious circumstances that were ruled self-inflicted. Before his demise, Reeves was having an affair with Mannix's wife, Toni. Reeves had experienced multiple suspicious accidents before his final fate. Coincidence? Mannix didn't believe in coincidences. But Mannix's most disgusting work involved Judy Garland. While Louis B. Mayer was poisoning her with substances, Mannix was covering up the evidence. He helped manage Garland's escalating substance dependency. ensuring her addiction stayed hidden from the public while making sure she could still work. When she overdosed, Mannix controlled the narrative. When she missed work, he created cover stories. His list of fixes reads like a catalog of human misery, coercing celebrities to terminate pregnancies, framing innocent people for crimes, helping recover Carol Lombard's severely charred remains after a 1942 plane tragedy. The man treated human suffering like a business expense. Here's what really haunts me. Mannix was present at multiple crime scenes before police were called. The stabbing incident involving Lana Turner's abusive boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato. The apparent self-inflicted passing of Jean Harlow's husband, Paul Byrne. The cold case involving silent-era director William Desmond Taylor. In every case, studio officials had hours to tamper with evidence before authorities arrived. Think about that. Studio officials were contaminating crime scenes as easily as a mafia don, and they were getting away with it because Hollywood was more powerful than law enforcement. Mannix's typical workday makes your skin crawl. He'd start with breakfast meetings about covering up assaults, spend lunch destroying evidence of possible homicides, and end his day threatening victims into silence, all while maintaining the facade that MGM produced wholesome family entertainment. The most terrifying part? Mannix enjoyed his work. Former employees described him as cheerful while destroying lives, whistling while he worked. He took pride in his ability to make any problem disappear. When Mannix finally passed away in 1963, he took his secrets with him. But the damage was already done. Hundreds of victims silenced, dozens of crimes covered up, countless pieces of evidence destroyed forever. Question for you. How many other Eddie Mannixes were operating in Hollywood? Drop a comment if you think we've only scratched the surface. Because our next monster proves that some predators hide behind the most innocent facades. Charlie Chaplin, The Little Tramp's Big Secret. Charlie Chaplin's comedic genius is undeniable. His personal life, however, reveals a pattern of behavior so disturbing that it makes your stomach turn. This isn't about artistic temperament or eccentric behavior. This is about a grown man who systematically pursued children. Chaplin was born into crushing poverty in London's East End, where his mother Hannah struggled with severe mental illness brought on by syphilis. At age 7, young Charlie was separated from his mother and placed in the Newington workhouse, where children were bathed by older girls and subjected to brutal punishment with 4-foot canes. His father abandoned the family when Charlie was barely 5, but trauma doesn't excuse what Chaplin became, a predator who bragged about his conquests. By his own admission, Chaplin claimed to have slept with over 2,000 women in his lifetime. But here's the sick part. He specifically said the women he'd loved had to be younger than him, much younger. At 25, he started his first major relationship with 19-year-old Edna Purviance. Suspicious? Maybe not. But then the pattern emerged. At 29, Chaplin became obsessed with 16-year-old Mildred Harris. This wasn't a romance. It was predatory behavior. He'd send her flowers constantly, wait outside the studio where she worked. A grown man stalking a child. They married, had a child, divorced. But it gets worse. Chaplin reconnected with Lita Gray when she was just 15 years old. He'd first cast her in The Kid when she was 13. But here's the truly disgusting part. He'd first met her when she was only 6 years old. Think about that. A grown man maintaining contact with a child from age 6, then pursuing her romantically when she hit puberty. That's not love. That's grooming. Lita became pregnant in 1925 and declined Chaplin's request for her to terminate the pregnancy. They married, had 2 sons, divorced in 1927. Another young life disrupted by Chaplin's predatory behavior. The pattern continued. Paulette Goddard was 22 when 40-something Chaplin married her, but the worst was yet to come. When Chaplin was 54 years old, he met Una O'Neill. She was 18. 18! They married and had 8 children together. He was 36 years older than his wife, old enough to be her grandfather. What makes this even more disgusting is how Hollywood celebrated these relationships. They called it romance, when it was actually systematic predation of vulnerable young women. Despite his father's only display of affection, a single embrace, given while intoxicated at a bar, which proved to be their final encounter before his father's passing from alcoholism. Chaplin never learned healthy relationship patterns, but that doesn't excuse pursuing children. Here's my question for you. If this behavior is unacceptable today, why do we still celebrate Chaplin as a hero? His films might be masterpieces, but the man behind them was a predator who used his fame to access vulnerable young women. The saddest part? Hollywood protected him throughout his career, dismissing his predatory behavior as bohemian lifestyle or artistic temperament. They enabled a monster because he made them money. But Chaplin's pattern of abuse was almost quaint compared to our next monster's systematic destruction of human dignity. Harvey Weinstein, the monster who finally got caught. Harvey Weinstein represents everything evil about Hollywood's power structure, but he's also proof that sometimes, eventually, monsters face consequences. His story isn't just about one predator. It's about a system that enabled him for decades. Growing up in Flushing, Queens, Harvey was shaped by a domineering mother, Miriam, who constantly berated him about his appearance, calling him worthless. His father, Max, was a failed businessman who betrayed Harvey's trust by stealing $9,000 intended for college expenses. Harvey's uncle, Shimmy Greenblatt, became his role model, a con artist who taught young Harvey that success mattered more than honesty. These toxic influences created a man who saw people as objects to be manipulated and controlled. In 1979, Harvey and his brother founded Miramax using their parents' names. Through the 1990s, they transformed low-budget films like Pulp Fiction and Shakespeare in Love into massive hits. When Disney bought Miramax in 1993 for $60 million, Harvey became one of Hollywood's most powerful executives. But here's what really makes me sick. While Harvey was building his empire, he was simultaneously operating a systematic program of harassment and assault. Over 80 women eventually came forward with accusations spanning decades. The stories are horrifyingly similar. Harvey would use his power to lure actresses to hotel rooms under the guise of business meetings. Then he'd make demands, threats, and ultimatums. Submit to his advances, and you might get a role. Refuse, and your career was over. Ashley Judd described how Harvey attempted to force her to watch him shower in his hotel room during the filming of Kiss the Girls in 1998. Gwyneth Paltrow and Angelina Jolie both revealed they'd been targeted by Harvey early in their careers. What's most disgusting is how long this went on. Harvey had at least 8 settlements with women over the years, meaning the industry knew he was a predator and helped him pay off his victims instead of stopping him. Think about that. For decades, Hollywood's most powerful executives knew Harvey was systematically abusing women, and they enabled it by helping him silence his victims with money. The Weinstein Company's board knew, agents knew, other producers knew, and they all stayed silent because Harvey made them rich. When the scandal finally broke in October 2017, Harvey was ousted from his own company within days. The backlash was swift and devastating, but only after decades of damage had been done. Harvey was eventually convicted on 2 counts, first-degree criminal act and third-degree assault. He's facing 39 years in prison, which at 70-something is effectively a life sentence. But here's what haunts me. Harvey didn't operate in a vacuum. He was enabled by an entire system that valued profits over people's safety. How many other Harveys are still out there, protected by the same system that covered for him? The most terrifying part of Harvey's story isn't what he did, it's how many people helped him do it. And speaking of enablers, our next monster had connections that go far beyond Hollywood. Jeffrey Epstein, the connected monster. The ties between Hollywood elite and Jeffrey Epstein represent one of the most disturbing networks of enabled evil in modern history. This wasn't just about one predator, it was about an entire system of powerful people who looked the other way. Jeffrey Epstein grew up in Seagate, a middle-class Jewish enclave in Brooklyn, where his parents Seymour and Paula struggled to fit in with more affluent neighbors. Jeffrey was academically gifted but socially awkward, earning the nickname Epi from friends who remembered him as sweet and generous. However, growing up amid 1960s Brooklyn's ethnic tensions, where Jewish students faced frequent hostility at Lafayette High School, young Jeffrey learned to navigate dangerous social dynamics through manipulation rather than confrontation. That manipulation would eventually evolve into something far more sinister. Epstein's case garnered massive attention because of his connections to powerful figures, including Presidents Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. But his Hollywood connections were just as extensive and disturbing. While the Me Too movement was exposing predators like Harvey Weinstein, Epstein was attending high-profile Hollywood events. The 2016 premiere of Batman v Superman, the 2017 Gotham Awards. He was moving freely through industry circles while facing serious criminal allegations. But the most damning evidence was Epstein's little black book, a directory of personal contacts that reads like a who's who of Hollywood power. Ralph Fiennes, Dustin Hoffman, Jimmy Buffett, Alec Baldwin, David Blaine, Phil Collins, Chris Tucker, and Kevin Spacey all appeared in those pages. Now, being in someone's contact book doesn't make you guilty of their crimes, but it raises uncomfortable questions about what these powerful figures knew and when they knew it. According to court testimony, Epstein enjoyed talking about his friendships with stars like Cate Blanchett and Leonardo DiCaprio. There were reports that Chris Tucker and Kevin Spacey accompanied Epstein on private trips to Africa. Here's what really disturbs me. Many of these Hollywood figures maintained their relationships with Epstein even after his 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. They knew he was a registered offender, and they continued associating with him. What does that tell you about Hollywood's priorities? Epstein was found deceased in his jail cell in August 2019, officially ruled as self-inflicted while awaiting trial on trafficking charges. His passing meant that many questions about his Hollywood connections would never be answered. But here's what we do know. Epstein operated with impunity for decades because powerful people protected him. His network included politicians, business leaders, and yes, Hollywood executives who valued their relationships with him more than the safety of his victims. The Epstein case should have been a wake-up call for Hollywood about the monsters hiding in plain sight. Instead, the industry largely moved on, hoping we'd forget about those uncomfortable connections. Drop a comment if you think Hollywood's Epstein connections deserve more investigation, because our next monster proves that some evils are institutional rather than individual. Darryl F. Zanuck, the 4 o'clock predator. At 20th Century Fox, Darryl Zanuck didn't just run a studio. He operated what can only be described as a systematic exploitation ring that would make Harvey Weinstein look like an amateur. For decades, this man used his position to prey on vulnerable actresses in what became Hollywood's most notorious predatory system. The 4 o'clock girls weren't just a Hollywood rumor. They were Zanuck's daily routine of coercion. Every afternoon, at precisely 4 p.m., Zanuck would summon young actresses to his executive office under the guise of career discussions. What followed was a pattern of demands, threats, and ultimatums. Refuse his advances, and your career was over. Submit, and you might get a role. But you'd forever be marked as one of Zanuck's girls, a label that followed actresses like a scarlet letter throughout their careers. The human cost of Zanuck's predatory system is written in tragedy. Bella Darvie, a French actress who became entangled in Zanuck's web, saw her life completely destroyed by his manipulation. After discovering her intimate relationships with women, Zanuck cast her aside, leaving her penniless and blacklisted. Unable to work and drowning in gambling debts that Zanuck had encouraged during their affair, Darvie took her own life in Monte Carlo in 1971. She was just 42 years old. Carol Landis represents another victim of Zanuck's systematic cruelty. When the beautiful actress refused his advances, Zanuck didn't just drop her from films. He launched a vicious smear campaign, spreading rumors that she was involved in inappropriate activities. The lies destroyed her reputation so thoroughly that she couldn't find work anywhere in Hollywood. In 1948, at age 29, Landis was found deceased from an overdose of sleeping pills, another casualty of Zanuck's vindictive power. Even established stars weren't safe from Zanuck's predatory reach. Marilyn Monroe, Linda Darnell, Gene Tierney, Ann Sheridan, Jane Mansfield, and Judy Holliday all found themselves subjected to his casting couch demands. Those who submitted often found their careers manipulated to keep them dependent and available. Those who resisted faced systematic career sabotage. The most chilling aspect of Zanuck's reign of terror was how thoroughly it was covered up by the Hollywood establishment. Studio executives, agents, and even other actresses knew exactly what was happening at 4 p.m. every day. But the conspiracy of silence protected Zanuck while sacrificing his victims. The press, completely controlled by studio influence, never reported on the daily criminal acts happening in the executive suites. Zanuck operated with complete impunity, destroying hundreds of lives while maintaining his reputation as a respected filmmaker. Zanuck's predatory system wasn't just about exploitation. It was about complete psychological domination. He would promise roles, then snatch them away as punishment. He'd build up actresses' hopes, then humiliate them publicly. The power dynamics were so twisted that many victims blamed themselves. When the studio system finally crumbled in the 1960s, Zanuck had already inflicted irreparable damage on an entire generation of actresses. The self-inflicted harm rate among his victims was astronomical, the destroyed careers countless, and the psychological trauma immeasurable. Yet he passed away, wealthy and honored, his crimes buried beneath Hollywood's glittering facade. Here's what really makes me furious. Zanuck's crimes were an open secret for 40 years. Everyone knew, and everyone stayed silent, because challenging Zanuck meant challenging the entire studio system. But even Zanuck's systematic abuse pales compared to our next monster's deliberate collaboration with genocide. Samuel Goldwyn, the contract slaver. Samuel Goldwyn wasn't just a movie mogul. He was a master of human bondage disguised as a businessman. Behind the glittering facade of Goldwyn Pictures lay one of Hollywood's most ruthless exploitation machines, where actors became property and careers were weaponized. Goldwyn's 7-year contract system operated as legalized slavery. Under these ironclad agreements, actors had no control over their roles, schedules, or even personal lives. If they refused a part, no matter how demeaning or inappropriate, Goldwyn would suspend them without pay, effectively freezing their careers while extending their contract duration. Think about that system. A 2-year suspension could trap an actor for 9 years total, watching their prime earning years slip away while Goldwyn held all the power. It was systematic psychological torture designed to break human spirits. The most documented case of Goldwyn's cruelty involved actress Teresa Wright, who won an Oscar for her work in his films. In 1948, when Wright refused to participate in publicity stunts and cheap promotional roles that she felt were beneath her dignity, Goldwyn didn't just drop her, he systematically destroyed her. Despite her $5,000 per week salary, worth over $60,000 today, he canceled her contract and spread word throughout Hollywood that she was difficult and ungrateful. The blacklisting was so effective that Wright, at the height of her talent, found herself persona non grata in the industry she had helped elevate. But Goldwyn's evil went beyond mere contract manipulation. He routinely cheated actors out of their rightful earnings through creative accounting, claiming films lost money even when they were massive successes. His financial manipulation was so notorious that other studios used Goldwyn accounting as shorthand for systematic theft. He would pile on fake expenses, charge actors for their own publicity, and use complex subsidiary deals to hide profits while crying poverty. Actors would generate millions for Goldwyn while receiving pennies in return. Former employees described a culture of fear at Goldwyn Studios. He would scream at subordinates until they broke, fire people on whims, and demand absolute submission. His famous malapropisms weren't charming quirks. They were often delivered during brutal tongue lashings that left careers in ruins. Include me out wasn't funny when it meant your livelihood was over. The studio system that Goldwyn helped create and perfect was designed to break human spirits. Young hopefuls would arrive with dreams, only to find themselves trapped in a web of legal bondage and psychological abuse. Goldwyn didn't just make movies. He manufactured misery, all while positioning himself as a respectable businessman, bringing class to Hollywood. His crimes were systematic, deliberate, and enabled by an industry that valued profits over human dignity. When Goldwyn finally passed away in 1974, he was mourned as a Hollywood pioneer. But the actors whose lives he destroyed weren't invited to the funeral. Their suffering was just another expense item in Goldwyn's accounting books. Question for you: how many other respectable businessmen were operating similar systems? Because our next monster proves that some collaborations are unforgivable. Bill Cosby, America's dad, America's monster. Bill Cosby's fall from grace represents one of the most shocking revelations in entertainment history. The man millions called America's dad was operating as a systematic predator for decades, using his wholesome image as cover for horrific crimes. William Henry Cosby Jr. was born in 1937 in a Philadelphia housing project. His childhood was marked by profound tragedy when his younger brother James passed away in an accident at age 6, leaving young Bill devastated and guilt-ridden. Bill's father, William Sr., struggled with alcoholism and eventually abandoned the family when Bill was just 10 years old. His mother, Anna, worked multiple jobs as a domestic worker, often leaving Bill to care for his remaining siblings. But childhood trauma doesn't excuse what Cosby became: a predator who used his fame and trusted image to assault dozens of women. Cosby became a national legend in the 1980s through The Cosby Show, where he portrayed the kind, sweater-wearing doctor Cliff Huxtable. America embraced him as the ideal father figure, someone who represented the best of family values. It was all a lie. In 2005, Andrea Constand, a staff member at Cosby's former university, came forward with allegations that the comedian had drugged and assaulted her at his house the year before. Then the floodgates opened. More than 60 women came forward with similar stories. 60 women. Let that number sink in. Constant initially filed a civil lawsuit, but prosecutors decided not to pursue criminal charges due to insufficient evidence. 13 women agreed to testify as witnesses, all with identical stories of being victimized. The case was settled out of court in 2006 for an undisclosed amount. Here's what makes this particularly disgusting. In court documents from 2005, Cosby admitted to obtaining sedatives to give to young women he intended to have intimate relations with. He confessed to drugging women for the purpose of assaulting them. The pattern was always the same. Cosby would offer mentorship, career advice, or simple friendship. He'd invite women to his home or hotel room. He'd provide drinks or pills, claiming they would help with stress or headaches. Then he'd assault them while they were incapacitated. What's most sickening is how long this went on. Cosby was using his America's dad image to gain women's trust, then systematically violating that trust for his own gratification. Due to statute of limitations issues, only Andrea Constand was able to proceed with criminal charges. But the testimony from other victims painted a clear picture of decades-long predatory behavior. In 2018, Cosby was finally convicted and sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. The man who'd preached family values from television screens across America was revealed as one of the most prolific predators in entertainment history. But here's what really haunts me. How many people in Hollywood knew? How many agents, producers, and executives heard whispers about Cosby's behavior and chose to stay silent because he was profitable? The Cosby case proves that even the most trusted public figures can be monsters in private. His wholesome image wasn't just a persona. It was a hunting tool he used to access victims. Drop a comment if you think Hollywood needs to do more to prevent predators from using fame as a weapon. Because our final monster shows that some people choose evil even when they have every opportunity to choose good. Woody Allen, the protected predator. Woody Allen represents everything wrong with how Hollywood protects its artists, even when credible allegations suggest they're monsters. For decades, the industry has chosen to separate the art from the artist while ignoring the voices of alleged victims. Born Alan Stewart Konigsberg in Brooklyn, Allen grew up in a working-class Jewish family where his parents' tumultuous relationship created constant anxiety. His mother, Nettie, was domineering and critical, while his father, Martin, struggled with depression and gambling problems. Allen was painfully shy, retreating into books and magic tricks, developing the neurotic persona that would later define his comedy. He was bullied at school for being small and bookish, leading to deep insecurities that persisted throughout his adult life. But personal struggles don't excuse what Allen allegedly did to the children in his life. In 1980, Allen began dating Mia Farrow, a relationship that lasted 12 years. During this time, they raised Farrow's children and formally adopted Dylan and Moses in 1991. Farrow was already the mother of 7 adopted and biological children. The relationship ended abruptly in 1992, when Mia discovered nude photographs of her adopted daughter Soon-Yi, Previn, that Allen had taken. Allen was in his 50s. Previn was only 21 when the photos were found. But the photographs were just the beginning of a much darker story. In August 1992, Dylan Farrow, Allen's adopted daughter, told her mother about an alleged assault by the filmmaker. Allen had visited the Farrow family home in Connecticut, accompanied by French tutor Sophie Burge, babysitter Christy Grotek, and family friend Allison Strickland. Something was wrong about Allen's visit that day. Strickland reported seeing Allen kneeling in front of Dylan with his head on her lap in what appeared to be an inappropriate position. Dylan told her mother what had allegedly happened, and Mia immediately called her lawyer and took Dylan to a pediatrician for examination. To make the situation even more disturbing, Allen and Soon-Yi chose this moment, while these allegations were being made, to make their relationship public. The timing was grotesque. The case went to court in 1993. 3 witnesses, Strickland, Grotek, and Berge, testified about Allen's behavior that day. Grotek testified that she couldn't locate either Allen or Dylan for approximately 20 minutes. Burge reported seeing Dylan without underwear that day. Strickland's testimony about seeing Allen in an inappropriate position with Dylan remained the most compelling evidence in the case. Allen lost the custody battle on June 8, 1993. The court granted Mia Farrow custody of Moses, Dylan, and Satchel. But despite losing custody, Allen faced no criminal charges. Here's what makes this case particularly disturbing. Allen married Soon-Yi in December 1997, cementing a relationship that began when she was his partner's daughter and he was a father figure in her life. In 2014, Dylan Farrow, now an adult, published an open letter detailing her allegations against Allen. She described the alleged assault in horrific detail and asked why Allen continued to be celebrated while she lived with the trauma. Hollywood's response? They largely ignored her. Allen continued making films, winning awards, and receiving industry honors. A few actors distanced themselves from him, but most chose to work with him anyway. The industry decided that Allen's alleged crimes were less important than his artistic contributions. What makes this even more sickening is that Allen's own films contain uncomfortable themes about relationships between older men and much younger women. Manhattan features a 42-year-old man dating a 17-year-old high school student. Were these films showing us exactly who Allen was all along? The Allen case represents everything wrong with how Hollywood handles allegations against powerful figures. When the accused is profitable, the industry finds ways to look the other way, no matter how credible the allegations or how young the alleged victims. Dylan Farrow deserved better. All alleged victims deserve better. But Hollywood chose to protect a filmmaker over a child, and that choice says everything about the industry's priorities. The price of silence. 12 monsters, hundreds of victims, decades of cover-ups. And now you know the truth that Hollywood desperately wanted to keep buried. From Louis B. Mayer's systematic abuse of child performers to Woody Allen's protected status despite credible allegations, one pattern emerges clearly. Hollywood has always prioritized profits over people, fame over justice, and silence over truth. These weren't isolated incidents or different times. These were systematic crimes, enabled by an industry that chose to look the other way because the perpetrators made money. Think about what we've learned today. Studio bosses who supplied children with harmful substances. Producers who exposed themselves to 12-year-olds. Directors who stalked and terrorized their leading ladies. Executives who covered up possible homicides. Oscar winners who collaborated with genocidal regimes. And in every case, Hollywood protected them. Here's my question for you. Which story shocked you most? Comment below, because I'm genuinely curious which of these revelations hit you hardest. But here's what really haunts me. For every monster whose story we know, how many others were completely erased from history? How many victims were silenced so thoroughly that will never hear their stories. Today's Hollywood claims to be different. They have HR departments, legal protocols, and public relations campaigns about doing better. But the same system that protected these 12 monsters for decades is still fundamentally in place. The only difference now is that victims have social media, investigative journalists, and movements like #MeToo to amplify their voices. But even with these tools, how many monsters are still operating in plain sight? These 12 people didn't just commit crimes. They used their power to destroy human beings systematically. And Hollywood helped them do it by maintaining the conspiracy of silence that protected them. When you watch classic films now, remember what we've learned today. Behind every perfect take was a system that valued entertainment over human dignity. Behind every charming smile might have been a predator who got away with it all. These monsters thought their fame would protect them forever. Some were right. They lived wealthy and died honored. Others, like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby, finally faced consequences decades too late. But the victims? Most of them never got justice. They lived with their trauma, while their abusers collected awards and accolades. That's the real price of Hollywood's golden age. It was built on broken lives and buried secrets, and the industry hoped you'd never dig them up. But now you know. Now you've heard their stories. And maybe, just maybe, that's a kind of justice, the only kind we can give the victims now. Remember their names. Remember their suffering. Because Hollywood would prefer you forget. And that's the shocking truth about 12 evil people Hollywood desperately wants you to forget, and the system that protected them all. These 12 monsters thought their fame would protect them forever. Some were right. They lived rich and died honored, while their victims suffered in silence. But here's what they didn't count on. People like you who refuse to let evil hide behind entertainment. By subscribing, you're joining a community that believes truth matters more than fame. Justice matters more than profits, and victims matter more than box office numbers. Together, we're going to make sure Hollywood's monsters never rest easy again. If you found these shocking revelations as disturbing as I did, smash that like button, hit subscribe to help expose more of Hollywood's buried secrets, and share this video with anyone who thinks they know the real story behind the golden age of cinema.